Welcome to Eye on Korea, a video podcast produced by the Korea Economic Institute of America. Join us for in-depth conversations with experts and policymakers as we explore issues in Korea's economic and political relationship with the United States and how these issues may influence South Korea's regional strategies and its global relationships. I'm Scott Snyder, and today I'm joined by Dr. Jung H, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and the Pacific in the Biden administration. During her time at the U.S. Department of State, Jung worked on a wide range of issues in the Indo-Pacific. She concurrently served as U.S. Deputy Special Representative on North Korea from 2021 to 2023 and as the top U.S. official on North Korea policy from 2023 to 2024. Welcome, Jung.
Thank you, Scott.
And really, I just want to dive into your experience as a senior official in the Biden administration, which you left about 6 months ago. We're now 2 weeks into the Trump administration, and they're still onboarding. I don't think they're really fully up and running yet. But I wonder, in retrospect, what do you think is the legacy that the Biden administration has left to President Trump? And what are the biggest challenges related to North Korea policy and South Korea policy that the Trump administration is going to have to grapple with now that they're in charge?
Thanks, Scott. And thank you for having me on this podcast, and really appreciative of your partnership over the years. Korea has been really important, and I think the Biden administration understood that, and I think the Trump administration understands that. Korea is really important. There are 28,000 U.S. troops on the peninsula. There are 2 million something Korean Americans in the United States. It is one of our biggest trading partners, so of course Korea is important. But it also lives in a really bad neighborhood with Russia and China at its border and a nuclear North Korea that is seemingly not intending to come to the dialogue table anytime soon. On the Korea side, the South Korea side, I think of the ledger, I think we're on a very positive trajectory. We had deepened cooperation with the Republic of Korea across the board, from pandemic cooperation to emerging tech and AI, to public health, to cooperating on the war against the war in Ukraine. So they're chair of APEC this year, and they're chair of the Mineral Securities Partnership. There's a whole slew of issue sets that Seoul has taken a lead on and has been a really great partner on that. On North Korea, it's more mixed. On the positive side of North Korea, I think we did a lot of work, and we focused a lot on internationalizing the problem. I think when you talk to some of the other countries, they would say this is just a U.S. problem or South Korea problem. But we did manage to intensify discussions with other countries in Europe, across the globe, in South Asia, Southeast Asia, et cetera. So in internationalizing the North Korea problem, we were successful in doing that, and those efforts should be continued. On cyber, we focused a lot of energy on cyber because of the assessment that North Korea is using cyber more and more to generate revenue for their regime. So the cyber efforts were a key part of our efforts on North Korea. The negative on the North Korea side that I would mention is that, one, the tail of the failures of Hanoi is long. This was 2019. North Korea and Kim Jong-un himself was pretty humiliated by the failed summitry with President Trump back then. And then you had, in the intervening years, COVID, in which North Korea basically locked down. And the war and its support for Russia against Ukraine, of course, has really exacerbated the dynamics on the region. So I think we're in for probably a rocky road with North Korea.
Okay, and I want to come back to a number of those issues related to North Korea. But before I do, I also want to focus on the Camp David summit. This was really also, I think, a notable accomplishment of the Biden administration. But we're faced with political transitions in all three countries. And so I'm wondering how you see that process and, in particular, its durability.
The trilateral relationship was one of the most important diplomatic efforts that we worked on during the Biden administration. And it makes sense. You have these two very dynamic, wealthy, democratic countries in the region, two of our most important alliances, and so the administration worked a lot on those efforts. The point of, one of the ways that we tried to increase the durability of the trilateral relationship was to not just work at the leader level, which of course was incredibly important, but also across the departments and agencies and up and down those departments and agencies and the various bureaucratic hierarchies. So giving it a subnational as well as national and interagency collaboration, and really increasing the muscle memory of all of those organizations and agencies and departments and groups to deepen the trilateral relationship. So it's really important to continue those efforts given the heft that Japan and Korea have in the region and the enormous geopolitical challenges that we face.
So my impression was that a lot of those efforts were really designed to fireproof trilateral cooperation against transition here in Washington. But maybe the unanticipated thing is the transition in Seoul, certainly, and also the weakness of the government in Japan. How do you see those transitions as potentially impinging on the sustainability of the trilateral process?
Certainly, the leadership matters, and looking at the leadership transitions in all three countries, and as they get our legs, and as we get our legs, I would hope that the policy discussions are about how to continue and deepen and intensify that cooperation. So the mechanisms are there. There are assistant secretary level conversations, Indo-Pacific dialogues, defense cooperation, but also when it comes to technology leaders and trilateral technology leader cooperation, youth exchanges, and other people-to-people exchanges. Given that China's not going to be less aggressive, North Korea is not going to be less aggressive, and the ongoing war in Ukraine and the overlapping theaters in Asia and in Europe, it's incredibly important that the three countries continue at the leaders level to figure out ways to continue that relationship.
Yeah. I want to drill down on one of the issues that you mentioned in your opening response, and that is cyber, because I know you spent a lot of time on that, and it was very clear that the governments were coordinating much more actively on that. How do you think that we're really doing in terms of countering North Korea's cyber behavior? Should those efforts be read as getting ahead of the curve or trying to catch up with what North Korea is doing?
We need to absolutely focus a lot more on the cyber issue. When I was in the administration, we did a lot of work with the Republic of Korea, and we did a lot of work with industry, because this has to be a team sport. It can't just be the government officials talking to each other about what needs to be done. But because the nature of cyber transcends nations and geographic boundaries, it's something that we needed to work with. Definitely with South Korea on the coordination, as well as Japan, we initiated and launched a trilateral cyber diplomatic working group that we educate, that we gird our defenses, and to really continue to share information. Sharing information, and I think and coordinating on our efforts was really key. And doing that trilaterally gives it a lot more credibility. It increases our capabilities and our knowledge, and working with industry was incredibly important.
Okay. during the Biden administration, we talked a lot about revitalizing the alliance, and you laid out just the incredible scope and depth of the cooperation. But that also means that the alliance changed a lot under the Biden administration. And, of course, President Trump has his own prior experience working with South Korea. But things have changed. What are the most important things that President Trump needs to learn about the new alliance as it exists today?
The South Korea is not the South Korea, I think, of 2019 or of 2020. The South Korean government under President Yoon has looked outward. In the past, and as you know, Scott, there's been South Korea has mostly, to a certain extent, focused a lot on the North Korea issue as their chief and sometimes primary foreign policy issue. And it's still true to a certain extent. But under President Yoon, and I would say even under President Moon, the South Korean government has really looked outward, this global Korea, and really expanding Seoul's relationships beyond the region, beyond the U.S., beyond China, beyond Japan, but also looking at Europe. South Korea has opened a slew of new embassies in Europe and has a diplomatic mission now at NATO. President Moon also, President Yoon's predecessor, also had a new southern policy and a new northern policy. And I think all of those were designed to diversify South Korea's relationships, their economic opportunities, as well as I think it reflects an understanding of the new geopolitical reality. So the South Korea of now is more global, or is looking more global, and wants to be more engaged with the outside world, whether it's working with us on ASEAN issue or on the Mekong region or in the Pacific Islands, or in Europe, particularly against the Russia and what Russia is doing in Ukraine.
So this goes beyond your experience in the Biden administration, but we all know that there's a political transition going on in Seoul, and there's really a political vacuum right now at the beginning of the Trump administration. And we know that President Trump has a penchant for transactionalism. What would you say South Korean officials or a new South Korean administration coming in should be thinking about and doing in order to prepare for dealing with President Trump?
Your previous guest, Tammy Overby, did a great job explaining how much foreign investment South Korea was pumping into the United States. And there have been various analyses by Financial Times and other reports about the impact of the IRA and the CHIPS and Science Act and what that has done for communities and for our states. And you know, as president of KEI, how much of an impact that South Korean investment has in the United States. And given President Trump's focus on what's good for America, America first, that it might be beneficial to pour some energy and talk to and more intensify diplomacy at the subnational level to show the benefits of South Korea, the benefits of a strong South Korea, the benefits of this alliance with South Korea. Not to mention, as I said at the top, the 2 million plus Korean Americans in the United States, being the engine of economic development, and to focus on all of those good things that happened during the previous administration and all of those good efforts that the partnership has really evolved into over the past few years.
Okay. Let me turn back to North Korea because, of course, with President Trump, even though you said the Hanoi summit has a long tail, we see that President Trump is making his love calls to Kim Jong-un. He wants to renew symmetry. But that environment has also changed. And what is your thought on the other thing I think that is notable has been the references to North Korea as a nuclear state. and that seems to have rankled on the South Korean side. What is your view about the framework of any potential deal that President Trump might pursue and its implications for North Korea?
I would hope that there could be some sort of diplomacy. We tried over the past 4 years in the Biden administration to re-engage. There have been multiple outreach efforts, public, private, through third parties, to try to get North Korea out of its shell, whether it's talking about the pandemic, whether it's talking about other confidence-building measures or anything that North Korea wanted to discuss. But the North Koreans have used the pandemic and other things to continue to keep the United States at an arm's length. And of course, as a result of the pandemic, the diplomatic missions have left North Korea. The aid organizations had left Korea. So Korea became much more puckered up and became much more autarkic, which I think something that Kim wanted to do anyway, and COVID gave him an opportunity to do that. So I would hope that the Trump administration has better luck with Kim Jong-un. But as I mentioned, the memory of Hanoi still lingers. Kim has fewer incentives for diplomacy with the United States. In the past, North Korea would come to the table or engage in dialogue with the United States to try to hedge against China or to drive a wedge between South Korea and the United States, among other reasons. But with Russia and this alliance with Russia, the fact that China is turning a blind eye to some of North Korea's very bad behavior, it gives Kim less incentive to come to the table. I'll also mention that Russia and China collaborating to dissolve the panel of experts, which was a key mechanism for highlighting the sanctions evasion techniques, has done real damage to the sanctions regime. And in the past, that has been something, or sanctions lifting is something that Kim has wanted and has used dialogue with the U.S. to get that. And so I hope that there's some efforts and that there are positive efforts on that front, on engaging North Korea on all sorts of issues, particularly since the military situation is so tense. On the question of whether the recognizing North Korea as a nuclear weapons power would be viable, or what I think about that, that's something that North Korea has always wanted, recognition as a nuclear weapons power. It gives them legitimacy. It pulls them out of this rogue status, as Secretary Rubio has said recently, calling North Korea a rogue state. It gives them a luster that hadn't been there. I would encourage the administration and others to think about what that actually gets us. Is that going to get us a safer United States? Is that going to get us safer South Korea? Now, all of North Korea has poured a lot of resources into their shorter range ballistic missiles. They're much more sophisticated, very dangerous. And as long as he has those, that Kim has those weapons and continues to develop them, basically he's holding South Korea and Japan and the region hostage. So a recognition at the top, without dismantling of those efforts, I think would place enormous challenges on our alliance. I think it would place enormous challenges on our allies, especially South Korea, on whether they should go nuclear to defend against these North Korea's current arsenal of weapons.
Okay. I'm going to follow up on the Russian-North Korea relationship, even though it's very tempting to talk to you about South Korean nuclear debates. How significant do you think that relationship has become? And who is getting the most out of it, Putin or Kim?
I think Kim has a lot to gain from this relationship, and he has signaled over the past year that growing the growing interest in deepening that relationship. Not just to mention the relationship that was built on in June with the mutual defense agreement. Kim has a lot to gain. He has a lot to gain from on the legitimacy side. So he's no longer this isolated country, but he is standing with Russia and China in this anti-West, anti-imperialist struggle. He has gained politically and economically as a result of Russia blowing up the panel of experts and other UN mechanisms and not cooperating on sanctions implementation. Kim has the potential to grow that relationship. Russia is a member of other organizations, leads other groupings of countries. That opens up for Kim other relationships that he can have, whether it's political or economic, tourism, for example. But it also opens up potential proliferation relationships with countries that are looking at the arms transfers and the weapons transfers to Russia. Why shouldn't they purchase North Korean weapons? If it's good enough for Russia, it can be good enough for other countries. There have been reports about how North Korea could potentially get Russian air defense weapons, submarine technologies, re-entry technologies. So that would be a huge boost to Kim as he continues to grow this more sophisticated arsenal of weapons.
So it sounds to me like you think that the relationship will outlast the war in Ukraine.
It's very possible. There are lots of opportunities there that are pretty low cost, especially since China is not doing very much about that growing relationship, even though it is against China's interests to have a more emboldened Kim Jong-un.
Okay. Last, I want to turn to the relationship with China and U.S. South Korea coordination on the relationship with China. The Trump administration seems to be certainly moving forward with tariffs. There's higher tensions, it seems, but maybe the direction is still not quite certain. But that puts a lot of pressure on South Korea to also be in line with the Trump administration on China. How do you see the potential for coordination on policy toward China and the possible tensions that could emerge there?
I would look at some of the enduring and very sticky problems and the history. South Korea has very vivid memories of how overdependence on China can be weaponized against South Korean businesses, South Korean supply chains, South Korea's economy. So that's a real thing. That's in recent memory, and China's efforts and China's goals in the region have not changed. They're claiming expansive territorial claims. They're increasingly aggressive in the maritime domain, politically, and in the air. Beijing's willing to use economic coercion and as well as political coercion to get their way. And so those things I don't think are going to change. That historical memory of China's coercion, China's aggressiveness and the repression at home. And I would hope that as the two governments are working through their transitions and getting their legs under them and doing their policy reviews, that they discuss those ongoing challenges that they face together, and to do an inventory of the mechanisms that are available to them that we had worked on over the past 4 years to ensure that there's coordination and there's real conversations and frank conversations about what they're seeing and how to counter those moves.
So do you think that the overt South Korean alignment with the U.S. on China is here to stay?
That's not for me to say, and South Korea will have their own interests and will assess their own interests. Given what we've seen over the past few years about tension in the Taiwan Strait, how that might metastasize and bleed over into an opportunity for Kim, how Russia's invasion of Ukraine has really linked the Asia region to Europe and elsewhere, that it's really it would be at a cost to both countries to not continue to have a frank conversation about the situation. Those geopolitical realities are not going to go away anytime soon. And the reason that the Biden administration and we focus so much on allies and partners is because we are stronger together. China doesn't have a lot of allies and real partners. Neither does Russia or North Korea. And the combined efforts and the combined capabilities and the combined coordination of Korea, Japan, the United States, as well as our European colleagues and elsewhere are unmatched in our capabilities and in our coordination.
Okay, well, on that anticipatory note, I'm going to close this edition of Eye on Korea. Thank you for joining us today. I certainly hope we can have you back. And thank you for joining us on Eye on Korea. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like the podcast, subscribe so you won't miss the next one, and leave a review to help others discover the show. Follow the Korea Economic Institute of America on social media or visit keia.org for more resources, events, and expert analysis on Korea. We'll see you next time on Eye on Korea.